Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be doing another round of some thriller book recommendations. So if you're new to my channel, this is probably going to be, I think it's either round 12, maybe even round 13, but I've done so many videos of thriller recommendations now. And this is basically a video where I kind of just compile a list of all of the recent thrillers that I've really enjoyed reading and recommend them to you. I will have every single one of the videos that I've made before linked down below because there are so many. I've been doing this as a series pretty much since I've started my channel, so it's been a long time. And today I'm going to be recommending you a list of some of my favorite thrillers that I've been reading so far this year that I think you should check out because maybe you would also enjoy them. But before we do jump into today's video, I just wanted to take a second to thank today's video sponsor, which is Factor. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved meals right to your door. They have a team of gourmet chefs who create each meal, and they only use ingredients with integrity so that you can feel your best all day long. I think one of the biggest perks of using Factor is the convenience, because if you don't have a lot of time this summer, if you have so much going on in your schedule and you don't know how you're going to plan to fit in all of the things, I think Factor is the perfect solution because you can not only skip that extra trip to the grocery store, but you can skip all of the food prep that takes so much time, but you can still get the flavor and the quality and the nutrition that you're looking for. And I love that their meals are ready within 2 minutes. You just pop this thing into the microwave for about 2 minutes, or if you have a little bit more time, you can put it in the oven for about 7 minutes, and you get this amazing, delicious meal that is just ready to go in your fridge. Each week, you can choose from over 34 dietitian-approved meals so that you're always gonna have some variety. It's never gonna be the same thing all the time. They've also got you covered if you're calorie conscious and you're looking for something with a little bit less calories, because they have certain meals that are calorie smart, and those meals are around or less than 550 calories per serving. I'm definitely the kind of person that doesn't like to feel like I'm wasting my time, and so I especially love using Factor for those nights where I just do not want to try hard for dinner at all, and it's so convenient to just put this in the microwave for a few minutes and have a dinner ready to go. I'm also a big fan of their smoothies and the different juices that they have for like easy snacking or for something quick in the morning as well. The exciting thing too is that Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, if you didn't know, so with a wide variety of meal plans to choose from, there really is something for everyone. I personally really do love switching between both brands, and now you can as well at a discount with me. So go ahead and use my link down below and use my code gabbyreads50 to get 50% off your first box with Factor. Isn't that such an incredible deal? 50% off your first box when you use my code gabbyreads50 using the link in my description. Thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring today's video. And now let's get to the book recommendations. Alright, so kicking off this list, I'm gonna be starting with a thriller that I read at the very end of last year because it's been a while since I've talked about this book and I haven't mentioned it yet in a thriller recommendations video, and that's All the Dangerous Things by Stacey Willingham. This is actually the same author as A Flicker in the Dark, and A Flicker in the Dark is a book that I tried to read. I ended up DNFing that one, which I know looking back, maybe I should give that book another chance because that book is so freaking popular and everybody loves it and talks about it all the time. But this book is the second book from this author, and this is one that I went into with very little expectations because of how much I didn't really care for A Flicker in the Dark. But this is one that I actually really ended up enjoying, and it's wild to me too because this book has one of the most kind of like basic thriller premises that I've ever heard, because basically we're following this mom, right? Her name is Isabel Drake, and 1 year ago her son Mason, who is like a toddler, he's like a little baby, he was taken out of his crib in the middle of the night and she doesn't know what happened to him. And now that it's been a year, she hasn't really slept at all in the past year. Like, she has literally been getting zero sleep, and so she's a little bit like unsure if she can even trust herself at this point and trust her own state of mind. And it's kind of a story where you're just following her as she's kind of like losing it, and she's losing faith that anybody's ever gonna find her son. She's trying to figure out the truth about what really happened, and the police kind of don't even know if they can trust her. Like, they're even considering her maybe as a suspect because they think she's a little bit unhinged or a little bit unwell. And I think even though the premise of this thriller kind of sounds similar to a lot of thrillers that I feel like I've read before, like it doesn't really bring anything new to the table as far as like a thriller premise goes, but I thought this book was so interesting. It was so entertaining. I feel like right away this book just really gripped me and the characters really gripped me, and then it went places that I wasn't really expecting it to go. Like, I just think this book was something a little bit surprising for me. And even though it's been months since I first read this book, I've still been thinking about it quite often, and it's still something that's really memorable to me. So I think this is definitely one that is worth checking out if it sounds at all interesting to you. Then another book that I would recommend that I also read at the very end of last year is actually Sign Here by Claudia Lux, because this is one that I don't even know the genre, like how I would describe describe this. Like, I really do think it mainly falls into the thriller and like mystery genre, but I think it also has like a touch of like horror to it, and it also feels like a comedy and like a satire at times, because we're following this character who literally works in hell. Like, his job is to work in hell. So I guess it's a little bit like fantasy or like magical as well, but we're following this character who works in hell, and he's currently up to get this like big promotion, and he can only get this promotion if he can get one more member of this really wealthy Harrison family to sell their soul to him. But I think the thing that makes this book feel more like a thriller, at least for me, is that we do end up getting a lot of this family's point of view, you know, because half of this story is told from this guy's perspective who's like working in hell, and those chapters can feel like a little bit fantasy and a little bit like fun, but then in between those chapters we do get the perspective of this family who, you know, like they have all of these secrets. They're going to be spending the summer at their lake house, and like their daughter has this friend that's going to be coming with them, and they just have all of this drama. Like, there's all this family drama going on, but it really does feel to me like it reads like a typical thriller, but like I mean that in a good way. This book was just so much fun for me. It was so unique. I don't really think that I've ever read anything quite like this. Like, I love the idea of following a character who like works in hell, and I love books where you kind of have that trope of like a character who's like outside of humanity that kind of like judges humanity for how stupid we are and like the weird things that we do. And so it definitely had that trope going for it. And I don't know, I just really loved also like not just the guy's perspective of like him working in hell, but I really loved the drama going on within the family. I just thought it was so juicy and so interesting, and it kept me hooked and it kept me flipping the pages. So I had a really great time with Sign Here. I think it's also really impressive that this was a debut novel, because I'm going to be checking out anything that Claudia Lux writes in the future. My next recommendation is going to be for The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz, because hello, I think this is my favorite thriller that I've read so far in the year of 2023, and I don't know if that's like an unpopular opinion, because it seems like there's a lot of people that don't really love this one, and I can't really figure out why, because I think this book was so freaking good. It was so unhinged and so ridiculous. This story just has so many different buzzwords that I personally love to have in a thriller. Like, for example, we have a toxic kind of female friendship relationship that is just a little bit messy and a little bit chaotic, which I love. We have like a snowy ambiance. We're following a bunch of different writers who are all going to be writing books, and then it also all takes place at this like manor that may or may not be haunted, or just kind of feels like something's going on there. So there's just so much that I love about this book. We're following this character named Alex, and she has this really complicated kind of friendship with this other woman named Ren, and they've recently had this falling out. Like, they've been friends for 8 years and they were so freaking close, and then they had this awkward falling out where they're not really friends anymore. But then they both get this opportunity to go on this writing retreat where there's this really well-known famous female author, and she's going to be giving only a select few women the opportunity to come to her manor and write their next novels, and then she's going to be publishing only one of their next novels. And it's so interesting because it's kind of like a competition between the writers, and it was so entertaining. Like, there was just so much that I loved about this. Like, I love books that follow writers in general, but also like to make it a competition between the women. And the ending of this book just gets absolutely chaotic and unhinged and just a little bit over the top and ridiculous, but like in the best way. Really appreciate this book for all that it did. And I just think it was such a fun time. Like, I don't know, this is exactly what I was hoping it would be. It was even more than I was hoping it would be. I just loved it so freaking much. So if there's any thriller on this list that I would recommend you read out of all of these, it would be The Writing Retreat. This one is freaking pretty top tier for me. Another thriller that I would highly recommend is The Kind Worth Saving by Peter Swanson. This one is also in the running for one of my like top favorite thrillers that I've read so far this year. And this one is actually the sequel to The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson, which is also one of my favorite thrillers of all time. If you haven't read The Kind Worth Killing yet, I would highly, highly recommend. But this one, The Kind Worth Saving, I thought, for me personally, I thought this was just as entertaining as The Kind Worth Killing, which I was completely shocked by. I was not expecting to love this book as much as I did. And it's really cool because we do follow like some of the same characters, like some of the same characters from The Kind Worth Killing make an appearance in The Kind Worth Saving. And so I definitely think it's worth it to read both of the books in order, because I don't think you'll get as much out of the story if you only read The Kind Worth Saving. But this was just such a freaking lovely surprise. It was so interesting, and much like The Kind Worth Killing, we do get a couple different perspectives in this book, and there's different like moving parts parts and like changing parts in different parts of the book. I don't know how to explain this because it's hard to talk about a sequel without really like spoiling the first book, so you're just gonna have to trust. I also do actually have a few books from my book club this year that I would highly recommend, you know, because I do have a thriller book club, if you didn't know. It's the book troop, and I have this kind of like running joke that I usually don't end up liking any of the books that I pick from my book club, but this year especially, it really feels like things are starting to turn around for me because I have enjoyed a lot of the books from my book club this year, which includes What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. This is my first ever 5-star for my own book club. Like, I had such a great time with this book. In this story, we're following these 3 girls who were in the woods when they were like 11 years old. They were really young, and one of these young girls gets stabbed 17 times by this guy in the woods. And now the story is taking place years and years later when they're trying to discover the truth about what really happened that night, and they're starting to admit maybe it wasn't that guy who did it. Maybe one of them is a liar, and maybe they were lying about it. And so we get this crazy story about these girls who are coming back to the small town where they grew up and uncovering secrets from the past, and it's just really interesting, and I loved it so much. I thought it was so entertaining and so twisty. This is definitely one of those thrillers where there's like a ton of twists just like packed into the ending, which I personally usually really love. So again, I do have an entire live show discussing this book and all of my thoughts, so if you want to hear more about it, I will have that live show linked down below. Another one from my own book club that I really enjoyed this year is The Last Word by Taylor Adams, and this is from, you know, the same author as No Exit, which No Exit is one of my top favorite thrillers ever, so I was pretty hyped about this one as well. And this one is really interesting because we're following this woman who is house sitting. She leaves this 1-star review for this book that she really did not like, and the author just kind of like comes at her for it, and he's like, hey, you need to take this down because like I'm an indie author and this is really bad for me and whatever. And they kind of get into this like online heated battle over this, and then she starts to feel like somebody is watching her from outside of the house, and like maybe perhaps this author dude is stalking her and like wants to harm her. Like, I don't know. It's just so intense. Like, this whole book is like another one of those really intense thrillers that almost all takes place on the same night. This book also has this really cool kind of like book within a book element to it that I was just absolutely obsessed with, and it had me laughing my ass off, and just like, it was such great entertainment. And I don't know, I just love this book so much. Like, I definitely think this book suffers from, you know, the ending definitely gets a little bit too like drawn out in my opinion, and it's just a little bit too cheesy for me at the end. But overall, this was such a fun time. Like, once again, I have an entire live show linked down below where I discuss all of my thoughts on this book. And then we also have The Only One Left by Riley Sager, which this is, you know, another book troop pick from the month of July. I recently just did a live show with my mom and my sister where we all talked about this book, so once again, that will be linked down below. But this ended up being such a fun time. You know, Riley Sager he's always been one of my favorite thriller authors, but most recently his books have been very like hit or miss for me. And so I went into this one a little bit cautiously, but luckily this one really ended up working out for me for the most part. And this one is really interesting because we're following this protagonist named Kit, and she's going to be taking care of this woman named Lenora Hope, who has been accused of like murdering her whole family when she was a young girl. And this all took place in like the 1920s when Lenora was like accused of murdering her whole family. And now it's taking place in the 80s when Lenora is like an elderly woman, and we follow Kit as she's like kind of taking care of her. This story is just wild. It has like the best kind of like spooky gothic house atmosphere because most of this book takes place on this house that's like on the edge of a cliff, and the house is just, it's described as being built in this way where like the floors are uneven, and it's just like the most creepy spooky house. And I love the fact that Lenora Hope, she doesn't really talk, and so the only way she can communicate with her is by typing on a typewriter, which like the imagery of that is just also just very spooky and very odd. And there was just so much about this book that I really loved. Most of the plot twists at the end like don't happen until like the last like 10% of this book. I feel like this book is very much like a slow burn up until that last like 10% or so, and then everything just gets thrown at you, and it's a little bit like whiplash at the end of this book. And there were definitely some things about the ending that worked for me, and then some things that really didn't. But I think overall this was such a fun time to read this book. It was just so chaotic, and I really feel like Riley Sager is back with like his amazing unhinged chaos, you know? So I highly recommend The Only One Left. I would also highly recommend None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This one is another thriller that I gave 5 stars. Oh my god, I love this one so much. I feel like Lisa Jewell is one of those authors where her thrillers are never the most, I don't know how to say this, like her books are never the most like thrilling or like unpredictable, but there's just something so readable about her books, and I just find her books to be so interesting and so well written, and her characters are always so good. And in this story, we're just following these 2 women. One of them is named Jody, and then the other one's name is Alex, and they're both at this restaurant celebrating their 45th birthday, and they find out that they're birthday twins, and they're like, oh my god, how cool! Like, we both have the same birthday, and we're both turning the same age, like, how wild is that? And then this woman, Jody, finds out that this other woman, Alex, has this podcast where she, like, interviews women about, like, their lives and, like, their, you know, struggles that they've gone through, and Jody asks if she can be on her podcast because she's like, I'm currently going through something that's, like, really traumatic and whatever, and she's like, I want to be able to, like, document this experience. And so this story is about how these 2 women are going to be on the podcast, like talking about Jody's life and what's going on with her. And Alex is like pretty shocked to hear about some of the things going on in Jody's life that are just kind of like, whoa, like what? And I just thought this book was so interesting. I also love that in between the chapters of the women, we get little bits of like a Netflix documentary that's called Hi, I'm Your Birthday Twin. And it's like little excerpts of like what's happening in the documentary. So like, you know, from the start that like some shit is gonna go down between these 2, but you don't know exactly what or how it's gonna happen yet. And it was just so interesting. Like, I know that some people might read this and say that this is all just like family drama and it's not that thrilling, and like, yeah, you would probably be right, but it was just so entertaining for me that I loved it, and I gave it 5 stars, and it was really enjoyable. And then I would also recommend The Last One by Will Dean, which this was such a wild and unpredictable thriller in my opinion, because the only thing that this book tells you when you're going to read it is that we're following this character who gets onto this giant cruise ship. It's actually like one of those cruise liners, like it's even bigger than a cruise ship, and she gets on board with this guy named Pete who she's in love with, and then the next morning she wakes up and not only is Pete gone, but like everyone on this entire ship is gone, nowhere to be found, and she's alone on this whole ship. And that's basically all that it tells you on the premise of this book. Like, that's it. But that all happens in the first like 12 pages of this book. And if you noticed, this book is a little bit thick. It's like over 400 pages, you know? So I think it's absolutely wild and also so freaking cool that that's all they tell you in the premise of this book, because I find so often these days that there are so many thrillers that just spoil like most of the book in the premise. And so I think it is very respectable and very cool that they tell you absolutely nothing before going into this book. And this book, it has some of my favorite like thriller tropes or like things happening in this book that I can't even talk about because like, it doesn't happen until like closer to 100 pages in, and it's just so good. But like, holy shit, this book was just so intense. I just kept flipping the pages so quickly because I had to see where it would go. And it was just, it was very entertaining, and I just really enjoyed this one a lot, and I would highly recommend checking it out because it is just unhinged chaos and it's so good. Another thriller that I just recently read that I would highly recommend is going to be The Quiet Tenant. And this one does read more of like a slow burn mystery for the most part, but the thing that's so interesting about this one is that we're following the story of a serial killer, but it's told from the perspective of 3 different women in his lives. So we mainly get the point of view of this woman who's been being held captive by him for the last 5 years. And then we also, in alternate chapters, we get the perspective of a woman who is currently working at a bar. She's like a waitress in a bar, and she's currently falling in love with him. And then sometimes, not as often, but we also do get the point of view of his 13-year-old daughter as well. This book was really interesting. I think the biggest thing that I can say about this book is how beautifully written this book was, because oh my gosh, some of the writing in this book just like gave me freaking chills all over my body. Like, it was just so well done and so thought-provoking and so interesting. This book does remind me quite a bit of Notes on an Execution because of that premise, like the way that we're following a killer, but it's told from the perspective of women in his life. Like, that is definitely a very similar premise to Notes on an Execution, and I do think that that's like a solid comparison, but I also think this book reminded me quite a bit of the book Room as well, because of the way that we're following a woman who's being held captive for so long. It was just very interesting, and there was definitely some moments that were like some beautiful like feminist moments where it's like girls looking after other girls that just made me want to cry and get emotional because it was so well done. So I think if that at all sounds interesting to you, I think this one is definitely worth checking out. I was really surprised. I think the only thing, like my only issue I guess with this book, is that somewhere towards the middle it does feel a little bit slow. Like, there were definitely some moments where I was like, okay, like this pacing like could pick up, but overall I still had such a great time with this book, and it's still something that I would highly recommend. Another thriller that I very recently just read one that I would also highly recommend is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. This is the same author as Razorblade Tears, which was one of my top favorite thrillers that I've ever read. In this story, it's really interesting because we're following this man who's a black sheriff in a small town, and he's only been the sheriff for about a year when there's this really awful school shooting that happens. And after this school shooting happens, it uncovers that there has been this serial killer in their small town. This book is so brutal and gory, you know, much like I think S.A. Cosby is kind of known for writing these books that are just kind of like a little over the top with like the violence and the gore and like the kind of hard to read, gritty like images that can just really make you feel uncomfortable and disturbed. But I also think this book, the main reason why it didn't work 100% for me is because there's a lot of religion in this book. There's a lot of, you know, like religious, extremely religious people in this small town. I just personally don't love reading about extreme religion in my thrillers, but I do think that this was such a well-written book. I think S.A. Cosby is so talented at writing such interesting protagonists, and he's also just really talented at writing about, you know, more sensitive subject matter and doing it in a way that's just really like an open-minded approach to the subject. Like, I just think S.A. Cosby is so good at writing books like that. And so I would still definitely recommend All the Sinners Bleed, but just know that it's going to be a little bit intense and a little bit more graphic than your average thriller. And then the last book that I have on this list is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. This one is also, like, I don't know if I would describe this one necessarily as a thriller. I guess it is a little bit more of a mystery, and it's definitely more fun. Like, I don't know if I would consider this one cozy mystery, but it's definitely more on like the fun kind of mystery side of things. And this one was also just really fun and really interesting and so unique. I think something that's really cool about this book is that we're following a protagonist who talks directly to the reader. Not only is he like really breaking the fourth wall, but I just think the way this book was written was so self-aware and like so meta, but like in the most fun way. And we do follow a character where it's like literally everyone in his family literally has killed someone. Like, they all have so much going on and there's so many secrets. I think the fun thing about this book is that it takes place at this like ski resort place where they're gonna be having this like whole family reunion, and his brother is getting out of prison. And then while they're at this ski resort, they find this dead body like in the snow, but the way that it looks like the person died like doesn't really make any sense. And so there's this whole mystery surrounding that as well. And for me personally, I thought the mystery aspect of this book was just okay. Like, it wasn't my favorite necessarily, but the way that this book was written definitely is what makes it a standout for me, because it was so unique and so entertaining. I just can't even imagine how difficult it probably was to write this book, because there would be like scenes where he'd be like, don't worry, I know this part is cliche, but nobody's phone is actually going to die until page 239 or something. And then you would flip to page 239 and I would fact check him and it would be right. Like, that's when that scene would happen. And so it was really cool because this character would almost like, not like spoil you for things that were coming up, but just like hint at things and foreshadow things in a way that I've never read anything like this before. Like, it was so freaking cool. So I would recommend checking this one out. I think it's a really fun time and just really interesting. I just love the way that this one was written, and it's also cool because this author is actually a comedian, which makes sense because of how freaking funny this book was. Oh my gosh, there were some scenes I was like laughing my ass off. All right, so those are all of the books that I have to recommend to you today. You'll have to let me know if you've read any of these thrillers. What are your thoughts on these thrillers? Are these also some thrillers that you really enjoyed and that you would highly recommend? I would also love to know if you have any more thriller recommendations for me of anything that you didn't see on this list, maybe that's come out this year that you think I would really enjoy. And once again, if there's something that's not on this list and you're wondering why, it might also be because it's been mentioned on a list before. Again, I will have all the previous videos that I've done like this linked down below, so you can go ahead and check those out. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!